So we're looking at Daniel 11. So probably just around half of you, or a little over, were here in Sabbath school, and we're not going to go back over all of that. But I'm going to give you just a really brief overview for those that missed. Most of you know Daniel 2 and Daniel 7, right? Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome divided Rome with the little horn. If you know that, you know who the king of the north is all the way through Daniel 11 because it's the same. And so Daniel 2, 7, and 8 focused on who the king of the north is. Daniel 11 will bring into play another player called the king of the south. Babylon invades Jerusalem and Israel from the north. It's not where the capital is. You'll notice Babylon is, try that again. Babylon is not way north, it is to the east. But they went up and dropped down on Jerusalem from the north, making them a kingdom of the north, according to Jeremiah. Then the Medes and the Persians come in, an assembly of great nations from the north, according to Jeremiah, from the north. Then the Greeks come in from the north. Then the Greek Empire splits 4 ways, but Daniel only cares about 2, the Seleucids north, the Ptolemies south, and Jerusalem gets caught in the middle. From that time on, both Jerusalem and God's people of faith are caught in the middle. And if you're a follower of Jesus Christ today, any guess on where you are? You're right in the middle. Then the Roman Empire comes in from the north. The Roman Empire is going to have Jesus there too. And with the force of a flood, they shall be swept away from before him and be broken, and also the prince of the covenant. Jesus shows up in verse 22, which is right in the middle of the 45 verses of Daniel 11. So Jesus too was caught in the middle. He knows what it's like, and he rescues his people that are caught in the middle. So it's really about Jesus in many, many ways. Now, then the Roman Empire divides 10 ways, but Daniel, again, in chapter 11, only cares about 2, north and south. Islam comes up from the south, papal-led Christianity comes in from the north, and Jerusalem gets caught in the middle. Now, we have a king of the north and a king of the south. The king of the north in the end times, the papacy, is both a religious and a political power. And any time you have a caliphate in the Islamic world, you have a caliph that is both a political and a religious leader. King of the north, political, religious. King of the south, political and religious. And every time there is a king of the south, you have a holy war. The king of the north will declare war on them. The Pope, the man of peace, has done it repeatedly. It has never failed. Now, in Matthew 24, Jesus takes Daniel's writings and applies them both literally after the cross, the fall of Jerusalem in 70 AD, but he also applies it globally in a religious way to his people of faith. So as Jerusalem gets caught in the middle, so do his people of faith get caught in the middle everywhere in the world. This is illustrated in this one. The day of worship for God's true Israel is the seventh-day Sabbath. King of the north did not want to be called Jewish or Israelite, changed the day of worship from Sabbath to Sunday. King of the south did not want to be called Jewish or Israelite, changed the day of worship from Sabbath to Friday. Anybody want to tell me where a Sabbath keeper gets caught? If you're in the Philippine Islands, the northern islands are Catholic and the southern islands are Muslim, and a Sabbath keeper can get in trouble anywhere. If you're in Nigeria, the northern part's Muslim, the southern part's Christian, and a Christian can get in trouble. Seventh-day Sabbath-keeping Christian can get caught in the middle anywhere. It's true all over the world. You don't have to go to Jerusalem to get this. But Jerusalem has it as well. It's literal and a global religious application. And when you get this, Daniel 11 really lights up and becomes exciting. It gives a slight twist to what you've heard, but it confirms it and makes it stronger than ever for end-day events. And you start realizing this isn't about the past. Unfortunately, we focus so much on the beginning of the Advent movement, Daniel 8:14, that we put our young adults to sleep. Which do you think is going to wake up our world today? Talking about the 1840s or what's about to come after the Islamic conflict? It describes the current conflict and what comes after. By the way, you know what comes after? The close of the judgment. It's tied directly in Scripture. And what we're watching in our world today is God's announcement that the judgment is almost done, based on Daniel 11 and 12. Now, that's a message that's real-world stuff for our people today. So, 3 conflicts. Arab Islam and the Crusades, 25 to 28. Ottoman Empire and the Reformation, 29 to 39. And the time of the end, verses 40 and following. Now, we can graph it out this way. We have here the first conflict, Arab Islam and up through the Crusades. Then the Ottoman Empire Caliphate comes in. So this is what the Adventist pioneers called the Saracens, the first part of the first woe. Then you had the Ottomans, the second woe in Revelation. And then you have the time of the end conflict, which would be the same as the third woe. If you go back to an 1840s and 1850s charts, this stuff actually fits with what was taught in the past. In Daniel 9:29, what I'm going to show you right now is how dramatically these prophecies are even fulfilled since the time of Jesus. This is at the appointed time. It's during the Ottoman Empire at the appointed time. At the appointed time, he shall return and go towards the south, but it shall not be like the former or the latter. Notice there are 3 conflicts. The former one, which was the Crusades, the appointed, the Ottomans, and the time of the end, the latter one. So in the second conflict, the king of the north is going to head south, but it's not going to work out for him like the first and the third one. In the first one, the papacy got control of the Jerusalem for about 100 years. During the third conflict, according to Daniel 11, the papacy, traditional Christianity, will once again get control in Jerusalem. But during the second one, they do not. So he's going to go down there, he's going to try, but it's not going to work out like the first and the third. Why? For ships from Cyprus. Now that's pretty direct, isn't it? It tells you exactly who's coming. And in Daniel, when he uses place names, he means it. In Daniel 11, I don't see any symbolism. It actually says what it means. So ships from Cyprus shall come against him. Therefore he shall be grieved and return and rage against the holy covenant and do damage. So he shall return and show regard for those who forsake the holy covenant. He's going to head south. He's going to be stopped by ships from Cyprus. And he's going to rage against the covenant. There is an event in the time of the Ottoman Empire that does all 3 of them in sequence. Here's what we have. It's the Battle of Lepanto in the Ottoman-Venetian War in 1571. It's about Cyprus. You see, Cyprus had been Christian for a long time. And the Muslims were attacking Cyprus. They wanted to take it away because it was being used as a naval base by the Christians. And so it's under attack, and the Pope says, no, we can't lose Cyprus. And so he organizes what's called the Holy League. And they put together over 300 ships in a fleet. And they put thousands and thousands of men on board those ships. And they sail, and their goal is to go to Cyprus, retake Cyprus, and then go take Jerusalem. So he's headed towards Jerusalem again from the north. The Muslims don't like the idea. They want to hang on to Cyprus that they've almost conquered. So they send their own fleet of about 300 ships over the Cyprus. They finish off Cyprus and then sail west. And the 2 fleets meet right about here in the Battle of Lepanto. In an afternoon, somewhere around 50,000 men died in just a couple of hours. It was a massive battle, and the Muslim fleet was decimated and the Christian fleet won. But instead of going on to Cyprus and Jerusalem, they were so badly damaged that they turned around and went home and didn't come back out. The Muslim fleet, meanwhile, was rebuilt within a year, and they controlled the whole area. They're going to head south, but it won't be like the first and the last. It's not going to work out well because of ships from Cyprus. Where did the ships come from that stopped their advance? Cyprus. Daniel never misses. Amazingly, we're looking at Daniel 29 to 30. A guy by the name of Randall Yonker, the lead archaeologist for Andrews University, was studying into this stuff, and he dug up all kinds of information on this. And from some recent doctoral dissertations in Europe, he came up with the documentation to show that both the Muslim and the Christian fleets sailing into battle in 1571 believed they were fighting the battle of Daniel 11, 29, and 30. And that there would be another greater battle that would follow sometime later. And we forgot about it. But it was all known at one time. Anyway, just wanted to let you see that. But there's one piece missing, wasn't there? He will return home in anger against the covenant. Well, when the Pope hears that the Muslim fleet has been defeated, they put up this painting in the Vatican, showing, here's the Muslim fleet. You can tell they lost, the skeletons, and they're not looking too happy. The Christians are much happier. They've won. And he wanted to put beside it another picture of the conquering of Cyprus and the conquering of Jerusalem. But it did not happen, just as the prophecy said. So what goes in its place? In the next year, 1572, you have St. Bartholomew's Massacre, when just in a week's time, over 70,000 Protestants were double-crossed and killed in France. The people that are following God's word, the covenant, are double-crossed and killed. And the Pope puts two paintings up in the places where he wanted to have Cyprus and Jerusalem of the St. Bartholomew's Massacre, celebrating it. Interesting. It all fit. Now, with that in mind, let's take a look at the third and final conflict. If these other conflicts happen just as explained, then I would suggest the third and final one should as well. Let's read it. At the time of the end, very specific, it's at the time of the end, the king of the south shall attack him. Well, up until this point, that was Islam. So Islam would attack the papacy and traditional Christianity. And the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind, with chariots, horsemen, and many ships. He shall enter the countries, overwhelm them, and pass through. He shall also enter the glorious land, that's Israel. And many countries shall be overthrown, but these shall escape from his hand, Edom, Moab, and the prominent people of Ammon. He shall stretch out his hand against the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. He shall have power over the treasures of gold and silver, and over all the precious things of Egypt. Also the Libyans and Ethiopians shall follow at his heels. Now, I'll get into it more specifically, but there is a three-way breakup there of the king of the south. But when it names the countries, Edom, Moab, and Ammon are western Jordan. Libya, Ethiopia, Egypt. Those are all Muslim influence areas, aren't they? When the king of the south falls apart, it names Muslim areas. Isn't that interesting? So, we have these three conflicts, and in the third conflict, Egypt and many countries are overthrown. Islam falls, radical Islam in particular. Now, Israel is both the land of Israel in Daniel 11, and it's also all God's people of faith all over the world. It's both. Which means Egypt will be the land of Egypt, but it will be also all those that are radicalized as well. Current radical Islam had its birth in the 1920s with the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. So this fits completely. Egypt and many countries go down, which tells me Egypt will yet radicalize. And if you pay attention, the last free election in Egypt was won by the Muslim Brotherhood. There's not been a free election since. The military took back over. So radical Islam goes down. Moderate Islam, Libya and Ethiopia, go along with the king of the north. They follow like a puppy dog in the Hebrew. And Edom, Moab, and Ammon escape. They end up proclaiming the loud cry with the Christian remnant. Now, 2011... the review published our book. It had some expectations that were future in 2011. It was kind of funny. I used to be on book committee on the review at the Review and Herald Publishing Association. I used to pastor in Hagerstown, Maryland. And I knew that typically from the rough manuscript to book in hand is a process of about 2 years for the review. I was not in the mood to wait 2 years. And so when they were looking at my rough draft manuscript, I told them, look, this was in May. I said, if you're willing to print my book, I want it in hand finished by the 1st of August. Instead of years, I'm talking months. And I said, the reason for that is I want it to be still prophecy when it's printed, not history. And the president said yes, and his staff said no, and the president won the argument. I had it 2 days, like July 28 in hand. Anyway, here were the expectations that were yet future in 2011. Radical Islam would anger the papacy and attack it in some way. The Pope would call for war against radical Islam. The United States and its allies would be the military enforcer. That's just Revelation 13, folks. Radical Islam would be overthrown. Moderate Islam would follow papal-led Christianity, and some Muslims would follow Jesus in the Bible and be a part of his remnant. That was all future in 2011 when it was written and published. But in the summer of 2014, in sequence, those things began to happen. Here's what we have. The stories, the news stories that I'm going to put on the screen are just a selection of many, but these stories are in date order. You're going to watch a whirlwind unfold. Something that while you were watching it, you probably didn't know what you were watching. Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the self-proclaimed leader of the Islamic State, a caliph, he's claiming to be a caliph and establish a caliphate, makes him a king of the, just like the king of the north, political and religious, stretching across Iraq and Syria, has vowed to lead the conquest of Rome as he called on Muslims to immigrate to his new land to fight under its banner around the globe. I was expecting that there would be a caliphate, radical Muslim government, but I didn't know on day one they were going to target Rome. That was pretty clear. Most people missed it. But on day one, they targeted Rome. My question was, how long would it take the Pope to call for war? You may have missed it. It only took 5.5 weeks. Did you know he called for war and got it? He did it openly. But because most people aren't studying Daniel 11, including Seventh-day Adventists, they missed the significance. Here's what we have. August 7, 2014. Pope Francis appealed to world leaders on Thursday to help end the crisis in northern Iraq. After a sweeping advance by radical Islamic State militants forced thousands of residents of Iraq's biggest Christian town to flee their homes. By the way, that's exactly what's happening in Afghanistan today. His Holiness addressed an urgent appeal to the international community to take action to end the humanitarian tragedy now underway. So on August 7, 2014, the Pope called for action, military action. I was at an Adventist ASI convention in Grand Rapids, Michigan that day. I was watching these events because I felt something coming. And during a break, I was running an exhibit just like I'm going to be doing it this week at the Pacific Union ministerial meetings here in Tucson this week. During a break, I went online and I found this. The Pope had just called for military action. And nobody in an Adventist meeting seemed to care because they've ignored Daniel 11. And I was so frustrated. I'm watching a prophetic event happening in front of my eyes and nobody's listening. And there's a guy from about here to maybe the back wall away in the exhibit hall sitting in his exhibit, and it's a lull and there's nobody in the exhibit hall. And I tell my wife, hey, the booth is yours, I'm going fishing. Which simply means I'm looking for some action outside of my booth. I grab a book and a DVD, and I head down to the Share Him booth where Robert Falkenberg Sr. was sitting with nothing to do. Former General Conference president. And I sat down on a stool beside him and I said, hey, I want to share something with you, and I've got a book and a DVD, but since I'm given lots of books and DVD, you don't have to take it. You can have it if you want it. And I said, do you have a minute? And I'll explain what's going on today in Bible prophecy. He said, sure. I explained what was going on and why it was important. I said, now, do you want the book and the DVD? And he said, yes. Okay. Gave it to him and I left. A couple of days later, I get a phone call from the people who were selling our DVDs online. Said, man, Elder Falkenberg just ordered about 30 sets of your DVDs. Good. A couple of days later, Elder Falkenberg just asked for your contact information. Can we give it to him? I'm like, duh. Should have done that already. He got in touch with me, and for the last 2 years of his life, he was my mentor in how to get through sticky situations with the General Conference and NAD and etc. Anyway, he was the one that caught it that day. The very next day, after the Pope's call for action, Obama said, America is coming to help. Within 36 hours of the papal call for military action, the United States bombed the Islamic State for the first time. Kind of interesting. Now, some people said, hey, Tim, you're just preaching current events. I said, there is a difference. I put it in writing in 2011. Do you expect me to ignore it in 2014 when it happens? There is a big difference between just preaching it after it happens and preaching it before it happens and then saying, now it's happening. That should put us into the third conflict, which is relatively short. How short? I don't know. This one was 150 years. This one was 390 years. This one's short. So it's shorter than 150 years. I don't know how long. We've been in it for a while now. Oh yeah, this was kind of interesting. A lot of people started saying, oh, the United States went and played rough with somebody again and bombed them. The Pope didn't really want that. He wanted humanitarian action. And then the Pope sent out ambassadors to make it clear he wanted military action. The Holy See's ambassador to the United Nations, Silvano Tomasi, this weekend, supported U.S. airstrikes aimed at halting the advance of Sunni Islamic State militants, calling for intervention now before it's too late. While the Vatican vocally disapproved of the U.S.-led campaign in Iraq in 2013 and 2013 plan for airstrikes on Syria, fearing both might make the situation worse for Christians on the ground, fears of ethnic cleansing by Islamists has forced a policy change. Who is it that changed the Pope from being the man of peace to the one calling for war? The King of the South, radical Islamists. And by the way, when it says Islamist, that means caliphate supporters. When there's a King of the South with both a political and a religious power. Every time you have a caliph, the Pope calls for war. Crusades, Holy League, and then military action, and the U.S. supplies it, like Revelation 13 describes. Then, from that time on, the Islamic State was calling the U.S. the dog of Rome. Here, Obama is called the dog of Rome by Jihadi John. Let's see, the Pope says sic 'em and the U.S. bites. That would make the U.S. the attack dog for Rome. Now, it was pretty easy for the radical Muslims to figure out because they were having thousands upon thousands of bombs and missiles falling on their heads. And then when Trump took over, he doubled the number of bombs and missiles falling on their heads. But how many Seventh-day Adventists do you remember hearing saying, hey, the United States is already being the enforcer for Rome with Islam? Oh, there were a couple of us out here, but not very many. Then, but shrewdly, methodically, and with a showman's flair, the soft-spoken 78-year-old Argentinian Jesuit priest named Pope Francis showed Thursday that he is running to become president of the planet, and the secular Huffington Post was ready to endorse him. I mean, he went to the United Nations. Putin was there, Obama was there, and the Pope got the coverage. So who's more important, according to the media? Pope is. Now, get this. the time of the first woe, the Pope calls for the Crusades and the world follows him because they're afraid of a violent form of Islam. During the Ottoman Empire, he calls for the Holy League and the world follows him because they're afraid of a violent form of Islam. At the time of the end, all the world follows the papacy again, Revelation 13:3, right? Why? Because they're once again afraid of a form of Islam that's violent. It's right in front of our eyes, folks. We have a mass migration crisis and it may get worse. Yes, it's getting worse. I don't think this wave can stop, said Sonia Licht of the International Center for Democratic Transition. The global north must be prepared that the global south is on the move, the entire global south. This is not just a problem for Europe, but for the whole world. Daniel said the south's going to push against the north and it's going to create trouble. It's happening in multiple ways. Then that year and the year following, there's a guy by the name of Trump that started talking about building a wall on the southern border. And then he won. During the campaign, he was asked what he would do with radical Islam. He said, the point is radical Muslims, want to do serious harm. We have to take them out. We have to take them out very, very swiftly and viciously if necessary. We've got to destroy the brand of jihad. Sounds like a whirlwind, doesn't it? During his inauguration, he said this, we will reinforce old alliances and form new ones, and unite the civilized world against radical Islamic terrorism, which we will eradicate completely from the face of the earth. That is what Daniel 11 says is going to happen to radical Islam, if I'm right in my understanding. He started it, he didn't finish it. We're not done with this conflict yet. We could have been, but I don't think the church was ready. And we're in one more delay. Because we're not ready, when this conflict's over, it's the loud cry and the judgment ends. And God, getting his mercy towards us, has allowed it to wait just a little bit longer. Trump said he was going to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. That was on December 6, 2017. December 12, 6 days later, there's a meeting in Turkey where the Muslims that are angry at Trump over that meet. Notice it's meeting in Turkey, supposedly an ally of the United States. Erdogan, the president of Turkey, wants to become a caliph and lead a Muslim worldwide empire. Well, at that meeting, we find this. Soleimani, commander of the Al-Quds force, says his nation is ready to support Palestinian forces in the Gaza Strip, days after the U.S. recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital. That is one of the most loaded paragraphs I've ever seen. Are you familiar that we have Sunni and Shiite Muslims, and they don't always like each other? Just kind of like Protestants and Catholics in the Christian world? Sometimes they work together, sometimes they hate each other. Yeah, that's the way it is with Islam. Well, Soleimani is commander of the Al-Quds force, which is Iranian Shiite. The people in the Gaza Strip are Sunni. And he's saying he's going to support and arm them. Why? Because Trump just said he's recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. Another piece you need to notice here. Notice these are both highlighted, Jerusalem and Al-Quds. Al-Quds is the city that the Muslims believe, both Sunni and Shiite, will be the world capital of Islam at the time of the end when they control the whole world. The other name is Jerusalem. Same city. So if radical Islam intends to take over Jerusalem, do you think there might be a problem? Oh, suppose Christians or Jews want to take over the Temple Mount. Could there be a problem? Daniel said Jerusalem was going to be a pivotal, critical spot. Is it? Yes, it still is. So that was kind of interesting. This also shows me something else. Do you notice that they didn't tell you they're the same place? Story after story after story in the secular press will talk about Al-Quds, it will talk about Jerusalem, and only rarely have I ever seen them actually say they're one and the same place. And Soleimani is commander of the Al-Quds force. Al-Quds force. The special forces of Iran, trained to fight outside of Iran, are called the Al-Quds force. Do you get an idea why Israel in Jerusalem doesn't like Iran? Their special forces are named the Jerusalem Force, intended to take over Jerusalem. And they keep saying they're going to wipe Israel off the face of the map. It is an interesting situation. Now, here's a picture of Soleimani. At the time, he was the second most powerful person after the religious leader. And so here we have him holding a radio. Recognize the building? The White House. A bomb going off, a flag falling. You see, Soleimani claims that he's got, I forget if it was 1,000 or 2,000 terror cells in the United States. He's called in a strike on the White House. Trump was living in there at the time. What do you know about Trump? Does he like being threatened? Somebody threatens him, he tends to fight back pretty hard, right? So this is a direct challenge to Trump. And I don't think Trump forgot about it. Then we get this explanation of the difference between moderate and radical Islam by a Muslim. Saudi Arabia's powerful crown prince, Mohammed bin Salman, has described Turkey as part of a triangle of evil along with Iran and hardline Islamist groups. Oh, he just called any Islamist Muslim somebody that's evil. The Saudi prince also accused Turkey of trying to reinstate the Islamic Caliphate. There you go, King of the South. Abolished nearly a century ago when the Ottoman Empire collapsed. In this triangle, they are trying to promote the idea that our duty as Muslims is to reestablish the Caliphate, that the glory of Islam is in building an empire by force. We have no duty anymore to fight to spread Islam, but in the triangle of evil, they want to manipulate Muslims to tell them their duty as Muslims requires the establishment of a Muslim empire. I believe the Palestinians and the Israelis have the right to have their own land, but we have to have a peace agreement to assure the stability for everyone and to have normal relations. Wow, that was earth-shaking at the time. A major Muslim leader, a major one, just said Israel had a right to exist and to have land. That was a turning point. So a radical Muslim is a caliphate Islamist, and a moderate is one who's opposed to it. By the way, within a week or so, there was gunfire in the palace. They attempted to assassinate Mohammed bin Salman. He went into hiding for about 2 weeks, and the Iranians started celebrating his death. And then he came out of hiding. Hating Iranians worse than ever. Oh, back up for a bit. The U.S. opened the embassy and officially recognizing Jerusalem with the embassy there on May 14, 2018, which was exactly 70 years to the day from when Israel was established as a nation. Why is that important? The next picture. Take a look, here's a coin. Cyrus the Great in the background. After 70 years of captivity, he said, Jerusalem is yours, and they rebuilt the temple. After 70 years of nationhood, Trump said, Jerusalem is yours, and notice this is a temple coin. This group that wants to rebuild the temple did this as a commemoration of the two that would historically did form the decree to rebuild the temple, and the one they believe will give them ability to rebuild the temple again. If they do that, the Muslim world explodes. The meaning of the Pope's historic visit to the United Arab Emirates. What has changed in brief is the dual rise of the Muslim Brotherhood and the Islamic State. The following analysis applies equally to the Emirates and to Saudi Arabia. Facing direct challenges, the Gulf states calculated they could no longer appease Islamists and should instead crush them. Remember 9/11, 20 years ago? Most of those hijackers were out of Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia was just tolerating Islamists back then. They could no longer appease Islamists and should instead crush them. Their execution rates have skyrocketed in Saudi Arabia. They execute Islamists. That is precisely what they have done, both in the UAE and in Saudi Arabia. The institutional authorities of Islam and the political authorities with which they are allied have just bought themselves an institutional ally. That ally is the Pope. They signed agreements with the Pope. Yes. So we already have Muslim nations that are aligning with the Pope. Just like Daniel 11 said to watch for. If not a theological one. Whether the alliance keeps the theological barbarians at bay is another question. So here's another one of the propaganda pictures of Iran. Picture can be worth 1,000 words. So, these ships that are smoking and sinking, etc., they have their flags are either Israeli or US. The big Satan and the little Satan is what they call them. And so they're sinking, but in the background, what do you see? The Dome of the Rock. You do know where that is, don't you? Jerusalem. I have been in that. It was an interesting day. Some days you can get in, some days you can't. Depends on how bad the political environment is. If looks could kill, I'd be dead. But anyway, been in there. But take a close look at the water. Look at these breaking waves. That's not water. That's a Palestinian headscarf. Why are the Shiite Muslims supporting Sunni Muslims? Because they want Jerusalem, Al-Quds. Why are they attacking Israel and the United States? Because they want Al-Quds, Jerusalem. They put it all in their picture. But unfortunately, I don't think very many people in government understand what's going on. They think it's a conventional war. It's really a holy war. Then, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi was killed, the leader of the Islamic State. They just replaced him with somebody else. And the Muslim Islamic State went underground, but it's coming up all over the place. Mozambique, badly right now. Then on January 7, it was war. Did you know the United States went to war with Iran on January 7? It almost did. That headline was a couple hours early of what almost happened. But that was a headline I took off the internet. It was the Drudge Report. And each one of these lines, phrases, was a different headline from a world newspaper at the moment. I was actually just stepping out to make a presentation. I looked online. I knew stuff was going down. I copied and pasted that right out of and put it on one of my slides of what was going down at that moment. At that moment, missiles, Iranian missiles, were falling on a couple of American bases. And Trump had said if one American dies, he was going to take out 52 targets in Iran. And they included both religious and historical targets. Why 58? One for each hostage during the Iranian hostage crisis. Did you catch he's taking both religious and historical sites out? Does the United States do that intentionally? Or do they try not to take those out? Up until that point, tried not to take them out, and they're still trying not to take them out. But he was on the verge of going from a conventional war into a holy war. The jihadists are already in a holy war. At some point, papal-led Christianity will turn and go into holy war mode back, and it's too late to stop after that happens. We came within a couple of hours on January 7. Why was it so bad then? Because on January 3, Trump had taken out Soleimani, the number 2 man in Iran, with a drone strike. The one that had threatened Trump. and Trump took him out. But radical Islam sure didn't change its tune. Just a few days later, Alaska preacher in Jerusalem will soon be capital of a global caliphate. Siam can be seen telling the enthusiastic crowd that 3 prophecies would soon be fulfilled, that the rightly guided caliphate will be established, that Jerusalem will be liberated and established as its capital, and that Islam would achieve world domination. There's an Islamist viewpoint for you for prophecy. Then COVID-19 hit. And radical Islam went away. Or did it? Or did the media just stop talking about it? Undercover radical Islam is resurging everywhere. COVID has been wonderful for them. Let me just give you, I just did this back in June of 2020. I just took off Jihad Watch some things that were happening, being reported that day. And this is just, you can go to Jihad Watch and you'll see a list like this every day. Mozambique, Islamic jihadists attack pro-mass migration Doctors Without Borders. Green, red, which is red being socialist or Marxist and green being Islamic, radical Islam. There is a link coming between the two of them now. Twitter storm to America, burn baby burn. There were protests going on. Philadelphia Muslim cleric says demonstrations are useless, fighting and bloodshed are needed. They were stirring the riots. Burkina Faso, Muslims murder 58 people in attacks targeting Christians. Nigeria, Muslim shooter hacked to death 9 Christians, kidnapped 7 others. Muslim historian, U.S. collapsing. Islam is only a power fit to lead the world. France and Germany will be Islamic republics. Ilhan Omar, U.S. congressperson, calls for dismantling our economy and political system in the U.S. London, Black Lives Matter protesters scream Allahu Akbar. That's interesting combinations. Erdogan signs, this was from July, Erdogan signs decree turning Hagia Sophia into a mosque. Oh, he said that's a down payment for what he's going to deliver for Jerusalem. Islamic movement and left join forces in anti-American revolution. Palestinian presidential advisor, third intifada coming. U.S. will not be sole leader of the world for longer than 4 or 5 years. In the summer of 2020, there was a Catholic website by the name of Crisis Magazine that suggested Sunday laws would be a good way to recover from COVID. It's a conservative Catholic website. It's called Crisis Magazine. I found that article, and then I wanted to know more about Crisis Magazine. I watched their articles ever since. I went to their About page. Friends, I went to the About page of lots of organizations when I first hear about them. You should too. You learn about them, not just about what others are saying about them. But here's what Crisis Magazine says about themselves. The West has arrived at a crisis point. We must decide, do we serve the city of God or the city of man? Does our first allegiance lie with the church or with the state? Do we profess the ancient immutable faith or the latest fashionable secular dogmas? Not since the Cold War have we experienced such violent political, cultural, and spiritual unrest. Not since the Civil War has our country been divided so bitterly against itself. I'd say those are probably true. Our civilization, look at this, is under attack from the far left within and radical Islam without. I've been talking about radical Islam, but the traditional viewpoint in the Adventist Church has been talking about a power out of the French Revolution, which morphed into communism, Marxist socialism, communism, which is the left. So which one's right, or maybe are we both right? Isn't that an interesting thought? I'm going to get into that one this afternoon, about our political environment, how it matches prophecy. Biden wins the election and it's emboldening radical Islam, which is true. When you tend to have a political left-leaning president, it emboldens Islam. When you have a political right-leaning president, they attack Islam. And by the way, radical Islam grows in different ways under each kind of attack or situation. We had a terror slaughter, behead 50 men and boys in Mozambique football pitch before chopping them up and kidnapping every woman. That's down south of the equator in Africa. Pentagon ramps up attacks on resurgent ISIS. It is not defeated. That's this year. Civil war is brewing. Serving French soldiers send Macron another chilling warning following earlier letter from retired generals calling for military action against Islamists. France has no-go zones, and they're afraid, the military is afraid of a civil war in France with radical Islam against the Christian world. In France. Then we had an 11-day conflict between Israel and Hamas. Hamas was planning to run the parliamentary election with its list named Jerusalem is Our Destiny. So Hamas, a radical group, was going to focus on Jerusalem and that they would do a better job to retake Jerusalem. Abbas, the president of the Palestinian Authority, simply avoided elections again. He's president for, 4 or 5 years? He's been president without an election for 17 years now. Every time it's election season, he finds a reason to ignore the election. Never get around to it. So what do? Instead of having an election, Hamas attacks Israel. If we're not going to have an election, we'll prove we're the ones. So this was an interesting picture that the Islamic State put on their website. Washington, D.C., and they're showing what they hoped would be a picture of the beheading of Biden in Washington, D.C. They may be growing under Biden, but they don't like him. More recent, July. Senator Lindsey Graham warns All Israel News that IDF, Israeli Defense Forces, may have to launch a preemptive strike against Iran's nuclear facilities soon. Here's the problem. Iran says they're going to wipe Israel off the face of the map. If Iran gets a nuclear weapon, Israel knows it will happen. And Israel says they will not allow Iran to get a nuclear weapon. In the last couple of weeks, it has been revealed that Iran is 10 weeks away from a nuclear weapon. And if Israel is on record as saying Iran will never have one, how long does that give Israel to go to war and stop it? 10 weeks. Now that is a floating 10 weeks. Iran could stop working and just let it sit there. Or if they're working, and Israel seems to have a pretty good idea of exactly what Iran is doing. If Iran chooses to make a break for that 10-week window, Israel is clear. They will blow up all the nuclear facilities in Iran. And that means you have a war. Because Iran has already sent hundreds of thousands of missiles into Lebanon and into Palestine and Gaza and these different places and Syria. And if Israel ever attacks Iran, Israel is prepared to take somewhere between 400,000 and 600,000 incoming missiles. And Israel will go to war even though they know that will happen. Because they'd rather face 400,000 to 600,000 conventional missiles than one nuclear weapon. And we're 10 weeks away. What am I telling you? We could be very short on this fuse. It could wait a while. Depends on what Iran does. Muslims murdered 3,462 Christians in Nigeria in 200 days. The death rate is its highest ever there. And now we have foreign fighters flocking to Afghanistan, thinking that they'll use that as their base for around the world. Afghanistan is falling rapidly. The United States today is sending in thousands of forces to get Americans and others out as they leave. So as American troops are leaving, we're sending 3,000 specially trained ones just to get Americans out. As one city after another in rapid fashion is falling, and people are becoming slaves and sex slaves and all kinds of stuff across that country right now, as radical Islam is taking over. Which all tells me we're really in it. We had a push, we went into a kind of a pause, and it looks like we're into a push again. We have radical Islam will go down, we'll have a loud cry, and Michael Jesus stands up. The judgment's over. God will allow this to get the whole world's attention, then give the last warning message, and then the judgment's over. Friends, are you ready for the judgment to be done? Are you sharing with people that there's actually events in this world that are telling us that it's time to be ready? But because it's not our traditional message, we don't typically study Daniel 11, we ignore it. But there is only one prophecy in the Bible that says it explains the time of the end, and it's 11:12. Maybe we should be paying attention to it. Disagree or agree with me, I hope you'll study it. But news from the east and the north shall trouble him. Therefore he shall go out with great fury to destroy and annihilate many. He shall plant the tents of his palace between the seas and the glorious holy mountain. Yet he shall come to his end, and no one will help him. The king of the north wins over the king of the south, but he gets upset with tidings from the east and the north, goes out to destroy and annihilate. That's the Sunday law, etc., Revelation 13. And the mark of the beast. He takes Jerusalem, and he comes to his end. God takes him out. Now, tidings from the east. Edom, Moab, and Ammon. Notice, we have Israel, and right beside it we have Western Jordan. Geopolitically, literally, they are side by side. But God's Israel of faith has a group of Muslims that come in side by side with them to proclaim the loud cry, tidings from the east. Tidings from the north, there's a remnant out of Babylon, the king of the north in Revelation. And they come together to share that last final warning message with the world. Joel 2 tells it to us this way, and it shall come to pass afterward that I will pour out my spirit on all flesh. Your sons and daughters shall prophesy. Your old men shall dream dreams. Your young men shall see visions before the coming of the great and awesome day of the Lord. So just before Jesus comes, according to Joel, pretty specific, just before he comes, there's going to be a lot of dreams and vision activity. And all across the Muslim world, by the hundreds of thousands, Muslims are having dreams and visions, leading them to trust in Jesus as their Lord and Savior. I have a friend who leads an underground network in Muslim countries with over 500,000 Muslims that are following Jesus and the Bible. They don't claim to be Christian. They claim to be Muslims. But because they're following Jesus and the Bible, they believe Jesus is their Lord and Savior. Because they're following the Bible, most of them are Sabbath-keeping believers. Do you know why they don't claim to be Christian? Because in the Muslim world, if you claim you're a Christian, that means you're a crusader or a follower of the Pope. For that reason, when I walk into a mosque, and I do, my heart is always in my stomach and heart are all mixed up, I should say, as I walk into a mosque, because I'm never quite sure how it's going to go. But when I come out, every time but one, I was really happy I was in there. Because God works it out in amazing ways. But when I walk into a mosque, I don't say I'm a Christian. I say I'm a real follower of the book. You see, in the Quran, there are true followers of the book that are to be respected. Say, I'm a true follower of the book. I don't eat pork. I don't drink alcohol. I don't worship on the Crusader Day of Worship. And I believe in the whole book, not half of it. By the way, Muslims are ticked off at Christians because Christians claim they only follow the New Testament. They say, if you have an Old and New Testament, they're all from God. I agree with them. So I go in and say, I'm a true person of the book, and I say, hey, whatever happens, hey, there's 3 conflicts with Islam and the papacy. The Crusades, Ottomans, time of the end. Time of the end, radical Islam goes down, moderate Islam follows the papacy, and some Muslims follow God. So whatever happens, don't follow the Pope. And they look at me and say, who are you? Tell me more. Except for one radical mosque. And it looked like they wanted to kill me, so I was happy to go. Within 2 months, one of the members of that mosque killed 17 people in the U.S. So it wasn't just a feeling that I had. But hey, if these dreams and vision activity are happening, and they are by the hundreds of thousands, what does it mean? Jesus is about to come. The remnant within Islam is already forming up. They're having dreams and visions. The political events and the world events of Bible prophecy are already happening in multiple ways. I'm hearing God say, are you ready? And I'm looking around at a church that's sleeping on. And it really irritates me. Not so much irritates, it frustrates me. Because I'm trying to figure out how to wake people up. And I've been on pretty much every continent on this planet trying to help share this message. But anyway, who are the end-time allies? I'll pick that up this afternoon. And you'll be amazed to see how the King of the North, King of the South have allies involved in the political world and in the religious world here in the United States. It's everywhere. It may even be in your church. I'll pick that up this afternoon. The end-time allies and how it all fits together. So really, we're looking at how only Jesus saves. Your politics, etc., won't save you. One of them leans towards the King of the North, the other towards the King of the South, and I'll show you from Scripture how that fits. But it's time to take Jesus and the Bible seriously. It's time to study Daniel 11 and 12. It's the one that explains the time of the end. Share with others. People have already asked me here, do you have videos and stuff? Yes, I have a website. It's on that study guide, or the outline has the website. We also sell them on our website. I have some with me if I'm around here after sunset. Or you can come over to the Star Pass Marriott, where the pastors' convention is in the evenings, Monday or Tuesday, and I'll have them there in my exhibit. Also, seminars. We love to do public seminars. You can also get our videos and do a home seminar if you want. Lots of ways of doing it. But most important, are you praying? Are you praying for yourself, for others? Are you asking for opportunities to share the gospel? Are you praying for your church to wake up and share the gospel of Jesus Christ? All right. I gave you plenty to think about this afternoon. I don't even know when, because it didn't say in the bulletin. Does anybody know when? What did it say? After lunch? Okay, let's set a time right now. Somebody want to set a time? What's a good time after potluck? Two. 1:30, 2 o'clock, somewhere in there. Which should it be? 1:45. We got it. We got it. 1:45. All right, and so we'll pick that up. I'm going to open with Ellen White and Daniel 11 just very briefly, because there's not much there anyway. And then we'll get into our current world on how it fits together and with the politics, etc. Let's close with that closing song, which I don't have in front of me, and somebody else needs the lead. I do not do that.